I love a moment of your time to talk about a very interesting story that I had with a 32-year-old man who's a client of mine. It's my hope that what I share with him is a help to you the way it was a blessing to him. 32 years old, single, no children, and he dropped out of college, and he is working. And he said, Doc, I reached out to you because I have had 6 failed relationships over the past 7 years. And he said, I'm struggling because I simply have one question. He said, I'm a very spiritually grounded man. I love God. I believe I have a lot to offer. And he said, my simple question is this: what can I do to attract a deserving woman into my life? I said, cool. I said, so tell me a little bit more about you and in these failed relationships. I said, how did they all end? He said, they all ended the same. I said, seriously? He said, yeah. I said, in what way? He said, well, they all left him, and they all, at one point or another, he said, because I've been thinking about this, at one point or another said they no longer felt fulfilled in the relationship. I said, that's telling. I said, it's one thing to hear that from 1 or 2 people. I said, but 6 is clearly a pattern. So that's very telling. I said, so you say you're a spiritual man, which is cool. I said, tell me about your career. He said, well, what do you want to know? I said, well, it's not necessarily how much you are making in terms of money, but how successful have you been? Are you getting promoted? What are you doing? He said, no. He said, I've been pretty much, working, jobs here and there. He said, I've, had a role. When I dropped out of college, I had a role for 2 or 3 years, and then went to another job for a year, and then went to another job for like 2 years. He said, so I've kind of been bouncing a little bit. He said, but I always have steady work, enough to pay my bills and do what I need to do. I said, okay. I said, so you're not really being promoted in that space. And that could possibly be problematic. But I said, tell me about college. Why did you drop out of college? He said, honestly, Doc, he said, I just wasn't for the work, man. He said, the work was just too much. And it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And he said, I don't think college is for everybody. I said, no, college is not for everybody. So I'm not implying that. I said, but you dropped out because of the work. Was it because it was too hard or you didn't want to do it? He said, I really just didn't want to do it. I didn't really want to do the work. He said, my grades were just okay. He said, but it was mainly because I wasn't applying myself and I just didn't want to do the work. I said, so what I want you to know is that nothing kills attractiveness in a relationship more than laziness. Nothing. And he started laughing and said, yeah, my mom says to me that I'm a little on the lazy side and I could do more given my ability. I said, Mom is probably 1,000,000% right. I said, because here's the thing. It doesn't matter what people see in you. What's most important is what you see in yourself and what you're honest about concerning yourself. I said, dude, let's take this a step further. Especially with men, women don't like lazy men. They don't. I said, it's not even about your money and how much you're making. I'm not going to ask you that. I'm not going to ask you your waist size. I'm not going to ask you what your income is. But what I will say is that women are more attracted to work ethic than they are laziness by far. You don't have to be a CEO. You don't have to be some type of regional, national manager or whatever. I said, but I do know you have to have a work ethic. I said, and this sounds like laziness. I said, dude, you've been working for the last 13 years. You've never been in a job more than 2 years. You've never been promoted in any roles. And you quit college because you didn't want to do the work, and it screams laziness. I said, man, you don't need a Bay or a Baecation. You need a 5-hour energy. He started laughing. I said, I'm serious. You need a 5-hour energy. You need to put some effort into yourself physically, what you eat and how you work out so that you can have energy to be able to go out here and work hard. I said, because look, you don't even have a woman or kids yet. I said, if you think work is taxing now, understand, if you ever get a wife and you ever get children, as a man, you're going to work. I said, dude, you don't need to. I said, I don't mean any harm. I would love to work with you. I said, we could perhaps work on some things that would help you from a time management perspective, from a motivational perspective, to look into your values and interests, to make sure that you're in the right career track. Maybe you need to switch careers and do something that's more in alignment with what you're passionate about. Maybe that passion will then spark a work ethic that's greater than what you have. I said, but dude, I'm not going to even take your money to talk about women right now. You don't need a woman. You need work ethic. You don't need a woman. You need drive. You need ambition. I said, because what you're going to learn really quickly, and again, you're 32 and you're in your prime, so you should already know this, but what you're going to learn really quickly is that most women that are of substance love a man that have a work ethic. Now, the ones that won't care about you going from job to job. They won't care that you always have free time, that you're always available. Those will be basic women. I said, but women that are of substance, they want a man that goes to work every day, that has a drive. And if he's not going to work, maybe he has his own business and he's working for himself, but he's driving and working, because that's incredibly attractive. It says that he has the motor necessary to take care of her and a family. And even if you're dating, like, dude, you can't even afford a girlfriend right now. I said, do you know how much nails and hair costs? He started laughing. I started laughing. He was a really nice guy, very, kind-hearted. I think he meant well, but he started laughing. He said, yeah, doc. He said, I know it's. I said, exactly. I said, so man, you're struggling in between jobs and not really grinding in your profession, and you're worried about a woman. You need to get your money and your career up. Get your career up. When I talk to people about financial healing and wholeness, it ain't just about having a lot of money and saving and having good credit. That's great. Part of your financial healing and wholeness is having a good, solid career and a good, solid way of making a living. I don't care what your career is, but you need to get that up. I said, because this same Bible you read, where you say you've got a spiritual, foundation as a godly man, also says that if a man don't work, he shouldn't eat. And it is not just talking about you having a job, but it's talking about you being able to sustain yourself, and especially sustain a family. I said, so dude, you don't need you don't need a vacation. You don't need a holiday with no woman right now. You need to get your money and your career up, because I'm telling you, if you get your focus on your career and start getting your drive together in your career and show that you have a solid work ethic and you keep yourself together, I said, the women are coming. They'll be there. You ain't got to worry about them. I said, but get your mind on your work and off them gals. He started laughing. We were just laughing, having a good time. I said, but your story is a really good reminder to men that while you swiping up on Instagram and liking and hearting pictures, the hearts and the likes go a whole lot further when you have your career and your act together. Until then, even get off social media. You need to be grinding and getting your work ethic together, getting your laziness off the table so that you have a whole lot more to offer. I hope that made sense. If it did, type church in the comments with 3 R's. And then remember, you've got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you. What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Zeb. Listen, I've been dying to make this announcement for a very long time now, and I'm pleased to say that Inspire Nation has officially launched. Yes, we finally got a Facebook and YouTube community group where we're going to have exclusive content, exclusive shorts, exclusive discussion prompts, where we're going to engage with other people literally around the world who are on the same healing journey that we're on. I need you to go find these pages right now on Facebook and YouTube. Inspire Nation, follow the page, join the group, introduce yourself, and be prepared to link up with literally thousands of people around the world who are on the same healing journey, who are looking for the same resources, and who want to also be surrounded with other like-minded individuals who are growing in the same direction as you are. I'm so excited about this because it's the beginning of some great things I can't talk about right now. Listen, you got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you.